It is Monday, March 30th, and here are the top stories in the CNN newsroom. The White House tells the CEO of General Motors to hit the road and says the auto industry is not doing enough. We will hear from the president any moment now. Fargo on the edge of disaster. Floodwaters are going down, but a storm moving in today could spell more trouble for the already weary community. We will take you live to the danger zone. Good morning, everyone. I'm Tony Harris, and you are in the CNN newsroom. Struggling automakers under new pressure today to prove they can survive. At stake, billions of your tax dollars and the future of the entire industry. We expect President Obama to lay out his latest plans for the auto bailout shortly. We will have those remarks for you live right here in the newsroom. But here's what we know right now. General Motors CEO Rick Wagoner resigns at the direction of the White House. GM has 60 days to restructure and prove it can remain viable. Chrysler has 30 days. The administration is pushing Chrysler to finalize its merger with Italian automaker Fiat. And the Obama administration gives GM and Chrysler failing grades on their restructuring plan so far. Future bailout dollars depend on whether they can turn things around, and pretty quickly, too. The mayor of Lansing, Michigan, backs the president's effort.
I'm upbeat and optimistic this morning. The president has made a clear statement. He believes in the auto industry. He believes the auto industry is crucial to the country's future. And now is the time to support the president and get behind this program. So I'm actually hopeful that this is one bump in the road on the way to the cleaner, greener automobile company that will be making the exciting new cars of the future.
Okay, Kate Baldwin live from the White House with more on the president's plan. And Kate, great to see you. Basically, the president in just a few minutes or so is going to tell the nation what we just told everyone. But do we know whether the president is going to make a statement of commitment to the auto industry?
That's interesting, Tony. I wouldn't, of course, we never know exactly what the president's going to say, but I would expect that you're going to hear a commitment from President Obama. I mean, if you just take what we've heard in remarks leading up to this and what we've heard from administration officials, senior administration officials, they say, look, they wouldn't be giving this extra time period and floating these companies in this 60 and 30-day period if they didn't want them to survive. That we've heard over and over again, the American auto industry is so important, such a critical part of the American economy, that they do not want to see these companies fail. They reach out to too many different sectors, manufacturers, suppliers, car dealers. Yeah. And we've even heard from administration officials who trying to offer a little optimism, saying that they are confident that GM can survive and thrive after some major restructuring and concessions. They also continue to say, Tony, and I think you even mentioned it, two different companies, two different situations. Chrysler is in a much more difficult situation, but they're still saying if they partner up with possibly the Italian carmaker Fiat, there will be still a Chrysler that we'll see here in the States.
You know, I'm sort of curious, Kate. I think we're inside the 2-minute window here, okay. So let's stay with you on this. I'm just sort of curious as to what specifically the administration wants. Does it just want the automakers to move more quickly on plans that they're already pursuing?
I think these companies had quite a bit of time to put these plans together.
Absolutely,
and even before, I mean, their deadline isn't even until tomorrow, and the president and the administration is coming out to say, you know what, you get a failing grade. You have not proven your viability, as we keep hearing, in these plans. I think the administration is saying you didn't do what we asked. You are not proving that you have a path to viability. Therefore, we want to give you one more shot to make this work before we have to talk about what's next.
Yeah, and you're talking about two different companies here, obviously. Ford seems to be in pretty decent shape, at least right now. So the focus is on General Motors and Chrysler, and yet there are two different timetables being given to both of those companies. Chrysler has a shorter window to turn things around, doesn't it?
Yeah, and we've been asking about that, and the reason given to that is it's a different situation. They're not asking Chrysler to really look at restructuring their business plan anymore because they've come to an agreement on purpose, an agreement, an understanding with Fiat that they are looking into this partnership. They say they're far enough along in those discussions that they think 30 days will be enough to find out if this deal with Fiat is going to happen or not. With GM, they say they need some more time because they really need to get back to a fresh page, a clean start, really looking at more aggressively restructuring.
Yeah. Okay, Kate, if you would stand by, I want to bring in Susan Candiotti into this discussion. She's in Warren, Michigan. And Susan, I'm interested to know whether or not the people that you're talking to in Warren, what their expectations might be for the president's comments this morning. I asked Kate a moment ago if the president is likely to make some kind of overall commitment to the auto industry. I would guess that would be something that workers there would like to hear.
Sure they would. They would love to hear that because for them, it's not about cutting jobs. It's about trying to save as many jobs as is possible. Now, realistically, the union's very well aware that they're being asked to make difficult sacrifices.
Yeah.
They've got to be willing to give up health care benefits, some vacation benefits, as well as retirement benefits. Remember, GM has the largest legacy of any, if not the largest, one of the largest legacies of any industry in the United States. More retirees than any other company. And so that's a lot of people that have to be taken care of. So the president has already given some indication that there are going to have to be some painful decisions that will be made in the coming days and months. And the union members are bracing themselves for that.
And I'm wondering, Susan, do you get the sense that what the Obama administration is really asking for is for you we understand that you are making plans and some things you're pursuing right now, but we want you to hurry up already?
Oh, sure. And so they know that this has been that they have been working on this for a long time. And the employees here, well aware that they weren't expecting this decision of forcing Wagner to step down. But frankly, some of them are saying if it's going to mean some new blood at the top to give us some new direction, while they certainly were satisfied with what Wagner had done, they know that some new steps have to be taken.
And, well, that brings us to Rick Wagner, who has been running GM for, what, how many years now? 8 years or so?
8 years.
8 years. So why is he out? Is it part of legacy, and he's part of the legacy that has to go out with the old and in with new?
I think that certainly is part of it. And while the employees know that he's done a good job, still they acknowledge, as do other analysts, that all of his decisions have not been perfect.
Yeah.
There have been critical errors along the way with the choice of the plans for the future, what directions their cars, what models should be built. And he spent a lot of time concentrating on SUVs, on pickup trucks, and that just hasn't been the way. People have been looking for smaller, more fuel-efficient cars.
Susan, I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Let's take you to the president.
Is what to do with the state of the struggling auto industry. In recent months, my auto task force has been reviewing requests by General Motors and Chrysler for additional government assistance, as well as plans developed by each of these companies to restructure, to modernize, and to make themselves more competitive. Our evaluation is now complete. But before I lay out what needs to be done going forward, I want to say a few words about where we are and what led us to this point. Now, it'll come as no surprise that some Americans who've suffered the most during this recession have been those in the auto industry and those working for companies that support it. Over the past year, our auto industry has shed over 400,000 jobs, not only at plants that produce cars, but at the businesses that produce the parts that go into them and the dealers that sell and repair them. More than 1 in 10 Michigan residents is out of work, the most of any state. And towns and cities across the great Midwest have watched unemployment climb higher than it's been in decades. The pain being felt in places that rely on our auto industry is not the fault of our workers. They labor tirelessly and desperately want to see their companies succeed. It's not the fault of all the families and communities that supported manufacturing plants throughout the generations. Rather, it's a failure of leadership from Washington to Detroit that led our auto companies to this point. Year after year, decade after decade, we've seen problems papered over and tough choices kicked down the road, even as foreign competitors outpaced us. Well, we've reached the end of that road, and we as a nation cannot afford to shirk responsibility any longer. Now's the time to confront our problems head on and do what's necessary to solve them. We cannot and must not, and we will not, let our auto industry simply vanish. This industry is like no other. It's an emblem of the American spirit, a once and future symbol of America's success. It's what helped build the middle class and sustained it throughout the 20th century. It's a source of deep pride for the generations of American workers whose hard work and imagination led to some of the finest cars the world has ever known. It's a pillar of our economy that has held up the dreams of millions of our people. Now, we cannot continue to excuse poor decisions. We cannot make the survival of our auto industry dependent on an unending flow of taxpayer dollars. These companies and this industry must ultimately stand on their own, not as wards of the state. And that's why the federal government provided General Motors and Chrysler with emergency loans to prevent their sudden collapse at the end of last year, only on the condition that they would develop plans to restructure. In keeping with that agreement, each company has submitted a plan to restructure. But after careful analysis, we've determined that neither goes far enough to warrant the substantial new investments that these companies are requesting. And so today I'm announcing that my administration will offer GM and Chrysler a limited additional period of time to work with creditors, unions, and other stakeholders to fundamentally restructure in a way that would justify an investment of additional taxpayer dollars. During this period, they must produce plans that would give the American people confidence in their long-term prospects for success. Now, what we're asking for is difficult. It will require hard choices by companies. It will require unions and workers who've already made extraordinarily painful concessions to do more. It'll require creditors to recognize that they can't hold out for the prospect of endless government bailouts. It will require efforts from a whole host of other stakeholders, including dealers and suppliers. Only then can we ask American taxpayers who've already put up so much of their hard-earned money to once more invest in a revitalized auto industry. But I'm confident that if each are willing to do their part, if all of us are doing our part, then this restructuring, as painful as it will be in the short term, will mark not an end, but a new beginning for a great American industry. An auto industry that is once more outcompeting the world. A 21st century auto industry that is creating new jobs, unleashing new prosperity, and manufacturing the fuel-efficient cars and trucks that will carry us towards an energy-independent future. I am absolutely committed to working with Congress and the auto companies to meet one goal. The United States of America will lead the world in building the next generation of clean cars. And no one can deny that our auto industry has made meaningful progress in recent years, and this doesn't get talked about often enough. Some of the cars made by American workers right now are outperforming the best cars made abroad. In 2008, the North American Car of the Year was a GM. This year, Buick tied for first place as the most reliable car in the world. Our companies are investing in breakthrough technologies that hold the promise of new vehicles that will help America end its addiction to foreign oil. But our auto industry is not moving in the right direction fast enough to succeed in a very tough environment. So let me discuss what measures need to be taken by each of the auto companies requesting taxpayer assistance. And I'll start with General Motors. GM has made a good faith effort to restructure over the past several months. But the plan that they've put forward is, in its current form, not strong enough. However, after broad consultation with a range of industry experts and financial advisors, I'm absolutely confident that GM can rise again, providing that it undergoes a fundamental restructuring. As an initial step, GM is announcing today that Rick Wagner is stepping aside as chairman and CEO. This is not meant as a condemnation of Mr. Wagner, who's devoted his life to this company and has had a distinguished career. Rather, it's a recognition that we'll take new vision and new direction to create the GM of the future. In this context, my administration will offer General Motors adequate working capital over the next 60 days. And during this time, my team will be working closely with GM to produce a better business plan. They must ask themselves, have they consolidated enough unprofitable brands? Have they cleaned up their balance sheets, or are they still saddled with so much debt that they can't make future investments? Above all, have they created a credible model for how not only to survive, but to succeed in this competitive global market? Let me be clear. The United States government has no interest in running GM. We have no intention of running GM. What we are interested in is giving GM an opportunity to finally make those much-needed changes that will let them emerge from this crisis a stronger and more competitive company. The situation at Chrysler is more challenging. It's with deep reluctance, but also a clear-eyed recognition of the facts that we've determined after careful review that Chrysler needs a partner to remain viable. Recently, Chrysler reached out and found what could be a potential partner, the international car company Fiat, where the current management team has executed an impressive turnaround. Fiat is prepared to transfer its cutting-edge technology to Chrysler, and after working closely with my team, has committed to building new fuel-efficient cars and engines right here in the United States. We've also secured an agreement that will ensure that Chrysler repays taxpayers for any new investments that are made before Fiat is allowed to take a majority ownership stake in Chrysler. Still, such a deal would require an additional investment of taxpayer dollars, and there are a number of hurdles that must be overcome to make it work. I'm committed to doing all I can to see if a deal can be struck in a way that upholds the interests of American taxpayers. And that's why we'll give Chrysler and Fiat 30 days to overcome these hurdles and reach a final agreement. And we will provide Chrysler with adequate capital to continue operating during that time. If they are able to come to a sound agreement that protects American taxpayers, we will consider lending up to $6 billion to help their plan succeed. But if they and their stakeholders are unable to reach such an agreement, and in the absence of any other viable partnership, we will not be able to justify investing additional tax dollars to keep Chrysler in business. Now, while Chrysler and GM are very different companies with very different paths forward, both need a fresh start to implement the restructuring plan they developed. That may mean using our bankruptcy code as a mechanism to help them restructure quickly and emerge stronger. Now, I want everybody to be clear about this. I know that when people hear the word bankruptcy, it can be unsettling. So let me explain exactly what I mean. What I'm talking about is using our existing legal structure as a tool that, with the backing of the U.S. government, can make it easier for General Motors and Chrysler to quickly clear away old debts that are weighing them down so that they can get back on their feet and onto a path to success. A tool that we can use even as workers staying on the job, building cars that are being sold. What I'm not talking about is a process where a company is simply broken up, sold off, and no longer exists. We're not talking about that. And what I'm not talking about is a company that's stuck in court for years, unable to get out. So it's my hope that the steps I'm announcing today will have a salutary effect, will go a long way forward towards answering many of the questions that people have about the future of GM and Chrysler. But just in case there's still nagging doubts, let me say it as plainly as I can. If you buy a car from Chrysler or General Motors, you will be able to get your car serviced and repaired just like always. Your warranty will be safe. In fact, it will be safer than it's ever been because starting today, the United States government will stand behind your warranty. But we must also recognize that the difficulties facing this industry are due in no small part to the weaknesses in our economy as a whole. And therefore, to support demand for auto sales during this period, I'm directing my team to take several steps. First, we will ensure that Recovery Act funds to purchase government cars get out as quickly as possible and work through the budget process to accelerate other federal fleet purchases as well. Second, we'll accelerate our efforts through the Treasury Department's Consumer and Business Lending Initiative And we are working intensively with the auto finance companies to increase the flow of credit to both consumers and dealers. Third, the IRS is launching a campaign to alert consumers of a new tax benefit for auto purchases made between February 16th and the end of this year. If you buy a car anytime this year, you may be able to deduct the cost of any sales and excise taxes. And this provision could save families hundreds of dollars and lead to as many as 100,000 new car sales. Finally, several members of Congress have proposed an even more ambitious incentive program to increase car sales while modernizing our auto fleet. And such fleet modernization programs, which provide a generous credit to consumers who turn in old, less fuel-efficient cars and purchase cleaner cars, have been successful in boosting auto sales in a number of European countries. I want to work with Congress to identify parts of the Recovery Act that could be trimmed to fund such a program and make it retroactive starting today. Now, let there be no doubt, it will take an unprecedented effort on all our parts, from the halls of Congress to the boardroom, from the Union Hall to the factory floor, to see the auto industry through these difficult times. And I want every American to know that the path I'm laying out today is our best chance to make sure that the cars of the future are built where they've always been built, in Detroit and across the Midwest, to make America's auto industry in the 21st century what it was in the 20th century, unsurpassed around the world. The path has been chosen after consulting with other governments that are facing this crisis. We've worked closely with the governments of Canada on GM and Chrysler, as both those companies have extensive operations there. The Canadian government has indicated its support for our approach and will be announcing their specific commitments later today. While the steps I'm taking will have an impact on all Americans, some of our fellow citizens will be affected more than others. So I'd like to speak directly to all those men and women who work in the auto industry or live in countless communities that depend on it. Many of you have been going through tough times for longer than you care to remember. And I won't pretend that the tough times are over. I can't promise you there isn't more difficulty to come. But what I can promise you is this: I will fight for you. You're the reason I'm here today. I got my start fighting for working families in the shadows of a shuttered steel plant. I wake up every single day asking myself, what can I do to give you and working people all across this country a fair shot at the American dream? When a community is struck by a natural disaster, the nation responds to put it back on its feet. While the storm that has hit our auto towns is not a tornado or a hurricane, the damage is clear, and we must likewise respond. And that's why today I'm designating a new director of recovery for auto communities and workers to cut through the red tape and ensure that the full resources of our federal government are leveraged to assist the workers, communities, and regions that rely on our auto industry. Edward Montgomery, a former Deputy Labor Secretary, has agreed to serve in this role. And together with Labor Secretary Solis and my auto task force, Ed will help provide support to auto workers and their families and open up opportunity to manufacturing communities in Michigan and Ohio and Indiana and every other state that relies on the auto industry. They will have a strong advocate in Ed. He will direct a comprehensive effort that will help lift up the hardest hit areas by using the unprecedented levels of funding available in our Recovery Act and throughout our government to create new manufacturing jobs and new businesses where they're needed most in your communities. And he will also lead an effort to identify new initiatives we may need to help support your communities going forward. Now, these efforts, as essential as they are not going to make everything better overnight. There are jobs that won't be saved. There are plants that may not reopen. There's little I can say that can subdue the anger or ease the frustration of all whose livelihoods hang in the balance because of failures that weren't theirs. But there's something I want everybody to remember. Remember that it is precisely in times like these, in moments of trial and moments of hardship, that Americans rediscover the ingenuity and resilience that makes us who we are. That made the auto industry what it once was and what it will be again. That sent those first mass-produced cars rolling off the assembly lines. That built an arsenal of democracy that propelled America to victory in the Second World War. and that powered our economic prowess in the first American century. Because I know that if we can tap into that same ingenuity and resilience right now, if we can carry one another through this difficult time and do what must be done, then we will look back and say that this was the moment when the American auto industry shed its old ways, marched into the future, remade itself, and once more became an engine of opportunity and prosperity, not only in Detroit, not only in our Midwest, but all across America. I'm confident we can make that happen, but we've got a lot of work to do. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
And there you go, President Obama from the grand foyer of the White House laying out his plan for the automobile industry, essentially 30 days for Fiat and Chrysler really to merge, and 60 days for GM to clean up its books and present a plan to not only survive but thrive. Let's bring in Kate Baldwin at the White House, and Susan Candiotti is in Warren, Michigan. And Kate, let's start with you. I asked you a question at the top of this newscast, wondering whether the president would offer a clear-eyed statement of support for the auto industry, and it sounds like we got that. He said, we cannot, we must not, and we will not let our auto industry simply vanish. But it's going to look different, isn't it?
Yeah, I think the answer to your question is a resounding yes. He said in several different places in this speech, he made it very clear that he is making a statement, a commitment not only to the auto industry, but to the auto workers and the communities that are so affected by the auto industry. But it comes with but. Hang on a second. Yeah. It's not just more money throwing at a problem, which he says is the problem right now. They don't have viable plans. If we give them more taxpayer dollars, it's not going to be put to good use. And that's why he says, with the clear eye, he said at one point, that I understand with Chrysler, they're not going to be able to stand alone. They need a partner. They've found a partner. Hopefully that deal can be struck in 30 days. And with GM, they're going to be talking about major concessions, and he'd tick that off. They need to figure out how to unload, how to clear up their balance sheets. They need to figure out if they're producing the right vehicles, all of those things. So you heard a definite commitment of yes. I think it's also interesting, if I could just quickly note, there was a tone, you know, other than what we heard, getting the information out there of what the plan is, there was a tone that you heard throughout the speech of trying to boost confidence, or a tone of, he was trying to reassure the American public at several different places. Let me be clear, we're not going to let them go into bankruptcy.
Right.
You know,
and explaining the process that could happen, and how bankruptcy could be a way for this company, and particularly Chrysler, to survive and come out a bit stronger.
If we've learned anything, consumer confidence when it comes to the American economy and businesses is so key, and I think that's the note that he was trying to hit right there. We've got a rough road ahead, but believe me, we're going to get there.
And Kate, did you hear the other note? He is really sort of trying to reassure people that if you buy these American cars, if you buy these cars from Chrysler, if you buy a car from GM, look, we've got you, we will support you, we will guarantee the warranty. Let's listen to the president making that very point just moments ago.
Perfect.
If you buy a car from Chrysler or General Motors, you will be able to get your car serviced and repaired just like always. Your warranty will be safe. In fact, it will be safer than it's ever been, because starting today, the United States government will stand behind your warranty.
And Kate, important for the president, in your view, to have made that statement?
It's very important, and it was a point that senior administration officials were really trying to drive home. Listen here, even if they really fall into trouble in the next 60 and 30 days, don't worry, we are backing up your warranty. You can still get your car serviced. Basically trying to say, don't hold off on buying cars. If you were thinking about going to get one, go get one. We are backing your warranty, trying to boost that consumer confidence to get the economy going.
Kate Baldwin at the White House for us. Kate, appreciate it. Thank you. Let's bring in our Susan Candiotti. She's in Warren, Michigan. And Susan, I really was struck by the comments from the president. We was talking about how this industry has been so important to so many Americans, raising their standard of living for decades upon decades now. The president saying, look, it is not the fault of all the families and communities that supported manufacturing plants throughout the generations. Rather, it is a failure of leadership from Washington to Detroit that led our auto companies to this point.
Well, I think, Tony, that you will not hear any argument about that, about what the president said. You won't hear any argument about that from any of the union workers here. they have maintained all along that they have been working as hard as they could to try to keep the company afloat, doing their job to try to buy the very same cars that they manufacture. And what the one thing that they said some of the workers did before the president's remarks, I asked, do you have a message for them? And they said, help us, please. And then they added that they are convinced in their own mind, before hearing the remarks, that the president would not let the big three, and certainly GM in particular, allow this company to fail after being in business for so many years.
Yeah, well, Susan,
now, of course. Yeah.
Well, Susan, it sounds like then the music to their ears would have been the same comment that I read to Kate just a moment ago. We cannot, we must not, and we will not let our auto industry simply vanish.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And so I think that as soon as these workers get out of the plant and frankly take a lunch break or at the end of their shift, because we have not been able to talk to them to get their reaction, I'm sure that once they hear what the president said, that they will likely react favorably. But still, there's that thing that they have to worry about, the hard, painful cuts that they know they're going to have to make. And so far, the union has given some back, but certainly not enough, according to most analysts.
And there she is, Susan Candiotti for us in Warren, Michigan. Susan, appreciate it. Thanks for your help on the story. Billions of dollars to save the U.S. auto companies. Will it save jobs? Will it work?
When a community is struck by a natural disaster, the nation responds to put it back on its feet. While the storm that has hit our auto towns is not a tornado or a hurricane, the damage is clear, and we must likewise respond.
President Obama on the future of the auto industry and the bailout. A lot of jobs obviously are riding on the outcome of all of this. Christine Romans of our CNN Money team live from New York. Christine, I was so struck by the president making the comments about the number of people in this country who, through the auto industry, had their shot at the American dream, saw their incomes just continue to go up and up and up because of that industry. And the thought that this industry is in such crisis right now, I can't tell you how many members of my family, if not for the auto industry, I have no idea where they'd be.
And Tony, that's millions of American families. And you're right, the American auto industry is essentially the blueprint for the middle class lifestyle, a blueprint that other countries around the world are trying to emulate by building up their own manufacturing base, quite frankly, so they can build up their own middle classes. And here ours is in decline, as everywhere else around the world, they're trying to build it up. I mean, this is a place where you could get your foot in the door and you could work hard and you could make enough money to put your kids through college so that they could make the next step up, but that there was always a place to get in. And you'll hear from some people, you know, oh, well, it's an old manufacturing sector, it didn't innovate. There's an awful lot of innovation, frankly, in American manufacturing in the auto industry. And when you look, Tony, you know, I've got a map of you here of the 10 states with auto jobs. I mean, this is not Detroit. This is not the big three. There are 10 states that have a big concentration of auto jobs. According to the Center for American, or Automotive Research, rather, there are like 500,000 jobs that are suppliers that supply to these things that are outside of the three major U.S. auto workers. There are 2 million jobs overall, so spread out around the country. The auto parts makers, by the way, got their own quote-unquote bailout, low-interest loans earlier this month, about $5 billion. So, you know, it's a very difficult situation all across the country for people tied to the auto industry.
You know what, Christine, I want to talk about this more, but we don't have the time. But you're back with us next hour, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right, we'll see you then. Okay. Again, we're going to dig a lot deeper into the auto crisis next hour. As I just mentioned, Christine will be back with us along with Peter Valdez Da Peña of CNNMoney.com. Our discussion is forward-thinking, including what more GM and Chrysler can do to save themselves. We've also got help for